Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Team Tuesday. This week we have with us Patty Aluskewicz. Hey, Patty, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
So, Patty, Tuesday is, of course, Team Tuesday here on the podcast. But before we dive into the team topic, do share with us, what was one book that most inspired you in your career as a Scrum Master?
Yeah, I'm an avid reader, so I could probably make an entire podcast episode on every book that really impacted me and my career as a Scrum Master and Agile coach. But I'm going to list two, and the reason there's two is because they're by the same author. I don't know if you've heard of Daniel H. Pink. Have you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, of course, of course. So the two books that I'm going to mention here, I'm going to mention one that was more recent, and then I'll get back to like your original question, like what was the most influential book, which is a little bit further back in my past. The most recent book that he wrote is called The Power of Regret, how looking backward moves us forward. And I would call this book like tangential to Agile and Scrum. It's not really on like the process or the framework, but it's on kind of the inner work that you need to do in order to fully step into that accountability or role. This book was written a few years ago, and he did a worldwide study, conducted some research on what do humans regret the most. And people do carry a lot of regrets with them, things that happen in childhood that transition them into adulthood. And these are things that they can't quite forgive themselves for or let go of. The top answer that people gave is, I regret the things that I didn't do. So the chances that I never took. We're always afraid to address challenges or push ourselves out of our comfort zone because we're afraid we're going to upset people or we're going to ruin our reputation or lose our job. But what people really can't live with is the risks that they didn't take, the things that they didn't go for. And this is something that, as I've mentioned to you in the previous episode, I've consistently worked with coaches since 2008, both personally and professionally. And these people have held me accountable to the big goals and dreams that I have wanted to achieve. And I would say that stepping into my first Scrum Master role, which was officially in 2018, was one of those moments where I was really, really nervous to do it. And I waffled and I made so many excuses to myself as to why I wasn't good enough. And I was very fortunate to have a strong mentor and sponsor to push me to step out of my comfort zone and take the chance. I had all of the qualifications that a Scrum Master really, truly needs. The piece that I was missing is I don't come from a technical background. And you know that is a very hotly debated topic in the Scrum and Agile community. And seeing some of that debate on LinkedIn really, it shook my confidence for many, many months. But I am the type of person who consistently pushes themselves out of the comfort zone to push past those fears and impediments in order to take those big risks. And for me,
I imagine that how do you say, that courage to take the leap also comes from kind of believing in what you're doing. So how do you, whether it is through coaching or some other method, how do you do that work for yourself of really being very clear for yourself about what you're trying to achieve?
Yes, I think it is learning who you are at your core and writing down 2 or 3, maybe 5 of those values. And every decision that you make in life needs to align to those values. And it's kind of like the values and principles of Scrum, right? Same thing. Are all the decisions that we're making as a team and an organization in alignment with these values? And if they're not, having the courage to A, one, of course, admit it, and B, what do we do about it? And then C, taking action.
All right. And what was that book that you promised us and teased us even that was the most inspiring for you in your career as a Scrum Master?
Yes. And this, again, is by Daniel H. Pink. It's called A Whole New Mind, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future. This was the book where I had read, maybe this was in, 2018, right, when I was trying to waffle as to whether I was going to become a Scrum Master or not, where I started reading this book. I don't know what caused me to pick it up. I think it had to do with the title, because although I'm very left-brained, I have a science degree, I'm very analytical, I'm a huge data nerd, I do have this right brain side to me. And because my skill set was really, really strong in those areas, I said to myself, maybe I should read what he has to say about this. I read about a chapter or two, and I literally put the book down on my coffee table, and I said, I'm going to do it. It completely pushed me over that last hump that I needed to go for the Scrum Master role.
So it kind of gave you the inspiration or maybe the self-confidence you were missing?
Yes. And he talked about how, yes, knowledge work and knowledge is important. However, in the age of the computers, and now we know with artificial intelligence, right, the knowledge is something you can just look up, right? And soon the computers are going to be smarter than us. So the question is, in order to evolve in your career, you have to have that creative problem solving right brain side to you. And that's going to help launch you into the next phase of this technological revolution. What's interesting is this book, when I was reading it in 2018, what was interesting is I looked at when it was written, because I was like, oh man, this sounds like today. It was written in 2009. So this was a while ago that he was talking about this. We need to move away from memorizing facts, right? This is going back to when I was a teacher, memorizing facts, spitting facts out, and learning how to solve problems. Because one of the things he talked about was the abundance of choice. When you're creating products, you, as a consumer, now have choices between all of these products. And what's going to make the difference for the customer to pick one over two?
Yeah, and that's something we do try to, as product development experts, practitioners, we do try to find out. And that's also true of the teams that you work with. So now I would like to ask about a story of a team. So tell us a little bit about the context so that we know what the team was doing, maybe their size and so on. And then walk us through how those small little behaviors, attitudes that they had eventually led to big problems for the team.
Yes. I was thinking there are so many stories I could bring up here, right? Because even though we've been kind of putting people on Agile and Scrum and Kanban teams for 20 plus years now, I think the problem that one of the problems we failed to solve is really how people interact with each other. And again, this goes back to, what are we teaching children in school? Because that's where they learn their behavior patterns. And that was, again, one of the things that I saw that was lacking.
Can you give us an example of what that means in practice for that particular team you're thinking of?
Yeah. So, fast forward a number of years, I'm trying to think of how to, I don't want to give away too many identifying details, but I was dealing with a team that was, let's just say they were working on shipping a product. And it was a team that had a huge, complex process with many, many, many gates to go through in order to ship that product. And in coming in and observing some of their Scrum events and other more like scaled events, I finally had to say, this is really complicated. Let me see if I can build like a flow chart. So I started working on it, and I looked at it. I'm like, wow, there's like 100 gates, right? So you have somebody that checks somebody else's work, that checks somebody else's work, the checkers of the checkers of the checkers, right? And
It's
to
all
make a long,
checks. It's all
oh my
checks
gosh,
all the way down. It never ends, right? There's always something to be that
I
needs to
couldn't
be
believe
checked.
it.
Maybe and as the saying goes, who checks the checkers?
Right. So here's where they ran into problems with that. The product that was to be shipped, or the feature, whatever you want to call it, got to the final check before the release, and all of a sudden there was an error that was found. And I couldn't believe what happened afterwards. The finger pointing, the scrambling, I don't know how this got through. Maybe it was this person that did it. I mean, it was the craziest thing that I've ever saw happen. It was like people scattering to the wind. Nobody wanted to take responsibility or accountability, and nobody wanted to say like it was that person. It was very, very indirect. And I couldn't believe how many meetings and weeks of meetings that happened as a result of leaders, as well as myself as the agile coach, trying to figure out what happened in the process. And for me, I couldn't understand why we couldn't get together and just say, this is where the process broke down. Let's fix this.
Okay, so maybe there's something here that is, at least for me, interesting to explore,
Yeah.
which is why were they so interested in figuring out where the process broke down?
That's a great question. I don't know. And now that you're saying that, I didn't ask that question because I was just trying to like listen and meet with people and talk and figure out because as the agile coach, helping them with their, I hate to use the word process, but I was helping them with their delivery process, and I wanted to help figure out where I could help them tighten it up. So I don't know the answer to your question, but what ended up happening is nobody figured it out, right? Everybody was just pointing the fingers, redirecting. And what the company did was they just added more gates in.
Yeah, and I imagine that's exactly the reason why they had already so many gates in. I remember working with this team that they had 4 gates between the end of sprint and something being ready for shipping. So there were 4 gates. And they found a problem. And when they found the problem, what they did is they added 1 more gate. And of course, there was 5 gates. And eventually they had 6 and 7 and 8. And when I saw that happening, as I was reflecting on it, I realized that that particular team that I'm thinking of was more interested in finding a problem than in releasing the software. So they had designed the process to find problems. So whenever they found a problem that had passed all the other gates, they just came up with another gate to find that specific type of problems. And when you talked about your team, you also said that once the problem was found, they went into this finger pointing. And at that point, I realized, wait a minute, it's not the process that is creating the finger pointing. It's the finger pointing that is creating the process, because it's, of course, CMA, right? Cover my behind attitude, right? And as long as the team has that attitude of just wanting to shy away from responsibility, they will just create more gates, right?
And the thing is, by creating more gates, it creates more potential for error. So now we have I don't even recall how many gates there were. Let's call it, seriously, there were probably 50 gates because it was a very complex, and I'm trying not to give too many details, but it was a very, very complex process. And I'm like, okay, let's just add 3 or 4 more gates. That's 3 or 4 more potential spots for failure, which makes it more difficult to figure out what happened, right?
And if blame is the overriding motivator in that environment, then that's just one set of gates before the next one, right. And then the next one, and then the next one. Because when blame rather than achievement is what drives our decision making, we don't want to design a process around achieving something. We want to design a process around not being blamed.
Right. And I found that, and I've worked in companies of all sizes. So this is what I've found to be more in a large company environment. I think in smaller companies, there's less opportunity to hide, maybe, to hide yourself. So I feel like there's more opportunity for people to be maybe discussing a solution as opposed to running from potentially getting fired. It's just something I've noticed.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because the fear is there for a reason, and maybe that's the reason why it's there, because people are afraid of getting fired. When you think about this situation, if you would have the opportunity to go back in time and relive this, what would you do differently?
That's a good question, because, at the time, I was working with this particular portfolio for a while, and then I was moved off. So I had no opportunity to really make any impact on the improvement here. But for me, knowing that that's a potential to happen, right? If I go and work with another team portfolio moving forward, it is, I think, building relationships with the leaders more, building trusting relationships with leaders more, so I can have some more transparent conversations around that topic.
That's a great advice. Thank you for sharing that, Patty.
You're welcome.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.